and welcome to another episode of Unfinished Business. The U.S. Postal Service itself has warned states that it cannot guarantee that all ballots cast by mail for the November 3rd election will arrive in time to be counted, even if ballots are mailed by state deadlines. That is raising the possibility that millions of voters could be disenfranchised. In response to the Postal Service's warnings, a few states have quickly moved deadlines, forcing voters to request or cast ballots earlier, or deciding to delay tabulating results while waiting for more ballots to arrive. It's the latest chaotic development involving the post office, which has found itself in the middle of a high stakes election year debate over who gets to vote in America and how. These questions are extremely important in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. President Donald Trump said recently that he opposes much needed funding for the United States Postal Service because he doesn't want to see it used for mail in voting this November. He literally said he opposed fully funding the post office because, and I quote, it means they can't have universal mail in voting without more money. By directly linking post office funding to mail in voting, Trump is fueling allegations that he is trying to defund the postal system for political gain. The coronavirus pandemic has led to record shattering levels of voting by mail across the country. People are concerned about voting in person, so voting by mail is a safe and convenient way for Americans to still exercise their constitutional right to vote. Instead of expanding voting, Trump has tried to restrict this voting method because he believes it will hurt his reelection and Republicans across the board. Even the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends vote by mail to reduce exposure of the virus at the polls. Even after all this, Trump still maintains that there is mail fraud with mail in ballots, which he has not shown any evidence for, and studies have shown does not exist. You just cannot make this up. I continue to feel as if I live in a really bad reality show that I hope ends on November 3rd. What is repetitious for those of us who write and analyze politics and elections is that every election, we have to discuss the latest cheating scheme to suppress votes and how some candidates challenge the legality of legal votes. This way, if they lose, they can claim election fraud. This year, that candidate is Donald J. Trump, attempting to win a second term as president. And his scheme this year is to make American voters believe that vote by mail, a voting method that has been part of the American election system for over a century, creates fraud. Experts continuously say that the president's allegations of widespread fraud are unfounded. Even though Trump is more obvious and crude with his voting suppression tactics, he's actually following a long standing tradition traceable all the way back to the 1960s. Trump is taking it to a new level by attempting to suppress Republican votes right along with Democratic votes. For years, the Republican Party has been pushing voting by mail to help their senior, military, and rural constituencies who have tended to prefer it. Roughly one-fourth of Trump's votes in 2016 were delivered by mail. Not only do Republicans like to get their mail on time, but many of them are just as nervous about standing in line for hours on election day in the middle of a deadly pandemic as Democrats are. Officials in Florida convinced Donald Trump that he could lose the state this way because he decided to make an exception for Florida, stating that the Republican led state knows how to do mail in voting correctly. Trump and his wife have already requested their mail-in ballots, which raises the question of why he can't go to the voting booth on election day as he expects everyone else to do. But President Trump still insists that the rest of the country is incapable of running elections as efficiently as Florida and cannot be trusted to handle a large number of mail in ballots. Furthermore, just 2 days ago, President Trump commented that the only way we're going to lose this election is if this election is rigged. He said this during a stop in Wisconsin, the second of several battleground events he is using this week to counter program the Democrats' all digital convention. Again, I repeat, Trump is trying to get voters to believe that if he loses the election on November 3rd, it is because the election was rigged. You just cannot make this up. America's streets are filled with protesters because we no longer believe that our voices are being heard. One of the best ways to make our voices heard is at the voting booth. That is when our system is working. We can elect people who share our values to positions to create policies to better our lives. And we can hold existing elected officials accountable by voting them out when they no longer represent us. There is no more fundamental right than the right to vote. Without it, how is our government and political leaders legitimate? Chief Justice John Roberts' disgraceful 5-4 decision in 2013's Shelby County v. Holder ripped the heart out of the prime enforcement mechanism of the Voting Rights Act. Roberts argued that the South had changed and such protections were no longer necessary. 1965, Roberts suggested, was a long time ago in a different nation across a changed South. Tell that to the tens of thousands of voters in Georgia and other states this primary season where voting precincts were closed, forcing them to endure 6-hour lines to vote during a pandemic. And what about the 33 million Americans purged from the voter rolls between 2014 and 2018, according to the Brennan Center? Purge rates have soared since Roberts' decision in Shelby County, especially in the states the Chief Justice believed that prejudice was some artifact of a distant past. The purge rate is as much as 40% higher in states that have a demonstrated history of racial voting discrimination. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy announced this week that he will suspend the controversial changes he instituted to the U.S. Postal Service until after the November election. To avoid even the appearance of any impact on election mail, he said, I am suspending these initiatives until after the election is concluded. He went on to say that between now and Election Day, retail hours at post offices will not change. No mail processing facilities will be closed. Mail processing equipment and collection boxes will remain in place, and overtime for workers will be approved when needed. DeJoy also announced he would engage standby resources as of October 1st to, and I quote, satisfy any unforeseen demand that may occur due to increased mail. The postmaster did not say whether or not the post office will replace sorting equipment that was already removed or transferred. But he did emphasize that existing processing and collection equipment will not be affected until after the election, and that the post office will be able to handle the volume of mail expected, as many more Americans cast votes by mail this year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. His statement comes after the news that he will testify this Friday before the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, and next Monday before the House of Representatives. Pressure had been building since DeJoy was appointed Postmaster General about his decision to make changes at the agency that included reducing overtime for mail carriers and removing high-speed sorting machines. We cannot forget that the Postal Service is a link for many Americans, for example, who cannot pick up their own medication at a pharmacy. Take this statistic, for instance. The Department of Veterans Affairs delivers up to 80% of its outpatient prescriptions by mail. As the mail-in voting crisis has erupted, some Republicans have said the post office is a money-losing business. But the founders didn't put the postal clause in the Constitution because they saw it as a business opportunity. The Postal Service was supposed to serve broader national interests, and it still does. Let me be clear. There is no widespread voter fraud in US elections. This has been confirmed by experts of every political philosophy, and numerous studies have been conducted. Is there a pointed issue here and there? Of course. But it has been proven that neither the Democratic or Republican Party automatically benefits when states expand access to mail-in voting. In fact, the benefits go to the voters. Watching Donald Trump use the post office that Americans have depended on for centuries to divide Americans is a disgrace. The post office is a vital public service, from small businesses shipping their goods to patients receiving vital medication and everything in between. The Postal Service is essential to American life. That is why it is preserved in our Constitution. So let's protect it. Let's fund it. Let's stand up against anything and anyone who attempts to do otherwise. Please subscribe to watch our weekly show on YouTube at Rajette Harris, and feel free to send a comment, show idea, or just say hi to rajetteharris@gmail.com. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Be safe and join us next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Let's get busy and solve some unfinished business.